What we found and what I found is specifically as somebody who focuses on treating addiction is that I had a number of patients in my practice who had been stable for years, who had been doing really, really well. And with the absence of ongoing treatment, community support, but then also church or spiritual connections that people have, a number of my patients ended up relapsing, some to the point where it's still harder to get them back into states of health like they were before.
September is National Recovery Month, so for this month, we will be focusing on mental health with Dr. Jim Barry. He is professor and chair of the Department of Behavioral Medicine and Psychiatry at West Virginia University School of Medicine and director of addictions. He's been interviewed across the nation, including the New York Times, NPR, and Huffington Post.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to the High Purpose Podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Jim Barry, a good friend of mine and the department chair of the Behavioral Medicine and Psychiatry Department at West Virginia University. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, me too. We're doing this one today because September is National Recovery Month. And boy, when I was thinking about all of the opportunities and challenges related to recovery, you came to mind as the great work that you guys are doing at West Virginia and personally your passion for it. So I know that many people today who are out there listening have a lot of personal experiences, a lot of pain, and at the family level, at the community level. And so I know that we're going to be able to be helpful to folks and appreciate your expertise in this area and your heart. And actually, before we get into all of your expertise, I would like to just kind of start with some personal connections. So why don't you share a little bit about your personal background? How did you get into mental health and addiction services?
Yeah. So actually, I was born and raised in Michigan, Detroit area. And for as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a doctor. And as I got through school and then it started becoming a serious, career decision, I decided that I was going to pursue a family medicine career because I became very interested in mission work and the possibility of doing medical missions overseas. And I thought being a family doctor would provide me with the necessary general skills that I would be able to use anywhere in the world for people who were in need of healthcare. And so went through medical school planning to be a family physician. And my last rotation in medical school was with an addiction psychiatrist. So this was a psychiatrist who specialized in treating addictions, and it was on an inpatient service in the hospital. And that was completely transformative for me on so many levels. And I became very, very interested and attracted to working with that particular patient population, those who were suffering from addiction. And then also, it started spurring an interest in me about the diseases and disorders of the mind and how the body-mind connects and how, the environment that we're in has an interplay in this. I became fascinated with the field of psychiatry. But addiction really interests me because I got to really enjoy my interactions with the patients I was seeing on that inpatient unit. And I actually, ironically, because I know a lot of people in their understanding of addiction or what we technically term substance use disorders is, typically most people would see that patient population as somewhat of a frustration because they don't, at least from what they've seen, or at least some of their impressions, is that people don't get better. But I found that to actually be the exact opposite. And in my experience on that rotation, I saw people get better and I saw them get remarkably better, and in ways that I didn't see in other rotations that I had in the general medical rotations, and was also able to be present with those patients in ways that I wasn't able to be present with in some of the other medical rotations. And just a lot of the dance that one does and helping folks and learning their story and, what works, what doesn't, what are their motivations. So to make a long story short, at that point, I decided I really wanted to switch gears and look at studying and really focusing on psychiatry and specifically addictions. And so at the time, I asked a number of mentors that I had where would be a good place to go for a general psychiatry residency training where I could really get excellent addiction training. And the vast majority of people said, you got to go to West Virginia University, that they really, really do a good job in training and treating addiction. And so that's how I ended up here in Morgantown, West Virginia University.
Yeah, I was thinking about you being in West Virginia and me being in Kentucky right now. And our two states, we lead the country in statistics about overdoses and really challenging parts of addiction and recovery. And so in many ways, you're in an environment that excels in that and also is dealing with some of the toughest circumstances around. So you're in, as you and I like to say, for such a time as this, that you're put there for that reason. And I was just thinking about your coming to West Virginia, not just for school, but now being placed in the chair of the department. So there was a process of all that, but you actually got placed in that in an interim in 2019, if I remember that right. And then it was May of 2020, right? May of 2020 when you officially accepted the position of chair there for the department.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, right, May of 2020, it was March of 2020 is when COVID really hit the U.S. and various states were locking down. So it was mid-March when all of a sudden the governor of West Virginia had the shutdowns in play. And then I was asked to really consider becoming the chair, the full chair, the permanent chair then in May. And yeah, well, it was, it was, as you can imagine, it was a baptism by fire.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things, Mike, right, that you get in a position and you have no idea what's going to happen afterwards. So, for instance, going even further back, when I came here in West Virginia, that was 2002. And little did I know that we were going to be on the verge of a opioid addiction epidemic, the likes of which our country has never seen before. And that West Virginia would sadly be leading the nation in that addiction and overdose epidemic. And so, just looking back and a firm believer in we are meant to be at certain places at certain times on this earth. And I know that I was placed at that particular time and I was able to have a front seat of the opioid addiction and overdose epidemic from the early stages. So that really started picking up in the mid 2000s. And so I had a front seat to that and then had to figure out with my colleagues, how are we going to address this? And so I was, am grateful for that experience and to see how that played out because now I have skills and have been able to learn things that really do help people in significant ways. And so, trying to look at that with becoming the chair at that particular time, there was so much that we didn't know. Remember, I mean, back in the spring of 2000, we didn't know if we were all going to catch it and if we were going to be disabled, if our families were going to die by coming home with this thing. And so there was so much fear and there was so much uncertainty and in society in general, but then even more so in healthcare and with healthcare systems, right? And so as a new chair in the middle of trying to address and grapple with how do we keep patients in the community alive and safe, and then how do we keep those who are working in this system safe and do the right thing by them as well. At the time, it was rough. It was really, really rough. And I really started experiencing at that time a significant degree of burnout, of stress, and, even leading to some depression, in my own life, in my own experience. But fortunately, just like, what I learned before is was able to, make some, connections and to be able to, learn better about, how to really care for folks and help lead a department in a system, during times of, significant crisis and change. Um, and so now, looking back, it didn't feel good at the time, but it was certainly a tremendous, growth experience that I highly value and, am grateful for.
I was thinking about that because there was so much uncertainty at that time, and especially for healthcare workers and other types of services who are kind of leading on the front lines of people in service, but especially healthcare. And I think that we all got very single focus, which at the time we felt like we really had to, of keeping people physically healthy. And so we did everything we needed to do as best we could, to make that happen.
Yeah.
And as a unintended consequence of that, you had things like isolation, you had
Yeah.
things like not being able to get to treatment. And all of a sudden, what we start to see is cases of mental health and addiction, substance use, skyrocketing, right? So at the time where you're both trying to, figure out, one, you're personally new in your role, but two, just as far as the cause, you're trying to keep everybody healthy. At the same time, the mental health crisis is just going on, all the way off the charts. So just give people a little sense. I think everybody kind of intuitively knows that, mental health is increasing and the challenges are becoming more times. But what are you seeing, statistic wise, or a couple anecdotes? Just give us a little bit of a handle on what you're seeing as far as the rise of the problem here.
Yeah. Right. So, before the shutdowns occurred, um, I, given the nature of the work that I do, I appreciated how important, human connection is,
Mm.
and how important that is for our well-being in general, but especially for our mental and emotional well-being. And so once, started learning about, okay, what the state leaders and the system organizations are doing regarding, clamping down, and trying to minimize the risk of viral transmission appropriately,
Right.
that they were going to run the risk of making mental health worse. And so, I tried to, help people understand this, but again, right, we didn't know what COVID was going to do, what this virus is going to do. But unfortunately, my fears played themselves out. And what we saw nationally, for instance, is there was a 40% increase in significant psychological distress, by the fall of 2020. Yeah, 40%, people reported, greater, significant distress like depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, and also, substance use and addiction. The rates of alcohol use went up. The rates of, cannabis use went up. These other things. And, in my own practice, what we found was that people who were coming into the hospital were, as a whole, much sicker than they were before. And also, what we found, and what I found is, specifically as somebody who focuses on treating addiction, is that I had a number of patients, in my practice who had been stable for years, if not 10 years or more, and who had been doing really, really well. And with the absence of ongoing, treatment, therapy, regular meetings with their treatment providers, their physicians, their psychologists, their social workers, and then also with the absence of community support, whereas like 12-step programs, but then also church or mosque or synagogue and spiritual connections that people have, a number of my patients ended up relapsing, and some of them to the point where they overdosed and died, and some to the point where it's still harder to get them back into states of health like they were before. And so those sorts of stories that and examples that I experience in my own patient practice, I see play out in the practices of my colleagues and just as our hospital system as a whole. And so it's been a significant challenge in trying to deal with the unintended consequences of keeping people from one another. And so my hope is going forward that we really can learn the important lessons of what happens when we force people to separate from one another. So not only that, Mike, but then also the great concern we have for our children and what that has done as well. So what happens is, or what we saw, and this is certainly borne out by the literature, is that now you have kids who no longer have the stability of school, but also no longer have the accountability of going to school as well. And you have them now in situations that are very stressful for parents or even grandparents who are providers, and where you have instances of abuse, physical, sexual trauma that may have been picked up by a teacher or a pastor or, some other third party,
right?
Who's got their eyes on the kids, right? You don't have that anymore. And the rates of abuse went up, but then also, the stress and the trauma that, the caregivers were giving affected, the kids, as you can imagine. And that has just compounded the problem. So I really see us now having a generation of kids who have been exposed to these risks that we are going to have to figure out how are we going to help them in the years and the generation to come.
My experience, just in friends, family, people in my community matches exactly what you're saying. People who didn't struggle with mental health coming out of the pandemic are struggling with it. People who struggled with it before really struggle with it now. Kids are our biggest losers in this situation because they're really struggling. I read an article here. Young people are struggling too. 2021 study of kids and teens found that 1 in 4 have depression, 1 in 5 have anxiety. So then not only are you dealing with that, but you got parents who are trying to help their kid through that and they're stressed. And then there's some marital conflict at the house and that, it's this compounding now we're facing. And I think that what occurred to me through some of what you were just saying and some of my own experience is that the idea of recovery, this September National Recovery, the idea of recovery for many people prior to the pandemic was an isolated topic for those people. For a lot of people who didn't struggle with drugs and alcohol, or who weren't plagued with some very tangible addiction that, prevented them from accomplishing goals in life. They just saw that as a very subgroup of people who needed that topic. What I'm saying, and even experiencing in my own life, having led through the pandemic and gone through some of my own challenges with that, is I think recovery is a topic that we all need to be talking about, right? Because there's been some of us, all of us have had some level of pain or, trauma or difficulty or loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one, whether it's a loss of a job, loss of financial income, loss of just the normal routine we used to have. We all lost something in that. And so So this is the kind of two double-edged sword. Is one that it's the challenges are more deep and more prevalent, but the opportunity here is to say, hey, let's be honest. You know what? Part of the human condition is suffering. Like none of us gets out of this thing unscathed, right? So maybe we could all just be a little bit more honest about the challenges that we're going through, physical, mental, spiritual, whatever the challenges are that we're facing, and let's put them on the table, and let's get some help from one another, because we need to start to recover. We need to start to move forward, right? We can't get stuck and held back by these things. So maybe just talk a little bit about, and the spotlight is kind of also what I'm thinking about. When you called me right there around May 2020 and said, hey, I want to get my department focused. There's so much need. So many people are kind of pulling at us. We need to get a clear focus and direct the spotlight where we know it needs to go. So what's the opportunity here for us? Where can we shine the spotlight and maybe use some of these difficulties to actually, benefit all of us? So where do you see the opportunities?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think one of the silver linings of the COVID pandemic is just that it really people sort of dropped some of their armor that was set up against recognition of mental illness. And so you have celebrities, for instance, like Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles and others who really came out over this past year and a half and saying, hey, listen, even though I am at the top of my game and I'm at the highest degree of competition here, it is of utmost priority that I take care of my mental health now if I want to be able to survive. And I think that it was the case for a number of us during the pandemic, is it kind of forced us to maybe pay a little bit more attention to how fragile life can be, and maybe some of the things that we were putting our trust in or dependence upon, maybe we no longer have those. And now we're kind of forced with, oh gosh, what's going on here? And I think this is something I really am encouraged about the younger generation too, is they seem to be a much more ready and easy in talking about their mental illness in ways that our generation and the older generation has not been. So I have noticed this shift. And so my part of my mission and part of my hope in bringing you in to help us is, okay, now just that. We want to make sure there is a light that is now shining on the value and importance of mental health.
That's right.
How do we make sure we are the ones that are driving the discussion regarding the solutions to what's needed? Because, right, just like anything, somebody is going to fill in the gap to try to talk about what those solutions are. And not everyone is equipped to answer those adequately, or even has the right motivation to do so. And so I felt it was really important that our department in particular, with the skills that we have with the psychiatrists, with the social workers, with the clinical therapists, with the psychologists, that we are the ones who have really learned what the art and science of helping people who are suffering from mental illness. And so I want to make sure that we are doing what we can to drive the discussion regarding the solutions in addition to the need, and making sure resources are allocated appropriately, and that decisions aren't made that are actually going to be counter productive and harmful, but really what can we do that's going to be helpful going forward.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening and are in a leadership capacity, and you've been leading through pandemic, post-pandemic times, great leadership lesson here that, with the challenge, with the adversity also becomes an opportunity, and to be more proactive and say what matters most. What we've got a lot of things we could be doing. Where do we want to focus our time and our attention? What do we want to put the spotlight on? That's where change and transformation starts. And we'll talk in a little bit here, Jim, about your your team and what's going on as far as workplace culture. But just a moment here to say the first thing you need to do is stop and take an inventory of what really matters, what really is important, and let's get all of us focused and going in the same direction. Before we jump into workplace stuff, we'll do that in the next part 2 of the episode of the next time. But I want you to just maybe end here for this part as we kind of round out the topic of recovery in particular. What advice would you give someone right now who's struggling with mental health or addiction? Like if you had a patient just walk into your office first time and they had the courage to, tell you, hey, I'm struggling. What's kind of step one? Where would you tell somebody to get started?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I would tell that person is to try to give them some hope. Because actually treatment works and that there is treatment available. If someone were to access it, is that actually we do have good outcomes. And the important thing is making sure people get connected to the treatment that is available. And really it comes down to what degree of treatment does somebody need. So sometimes it's just a matter of they're going through some periods of stress and, some maybe mild depression or mild anxiety. And really what they need is just somebody, a professional to talk to. And the other silver lining about the pandemic is it's allowed and created an ecosystem, if you will, for a advancement of telehealth. And so there are so many now resources that one can access even from the privacy of their own home to just get some degree of direction. And sometimes that's all people need is they can reach out and they can talk to a counselor online. There's even some apps that you can do some self-assessments with and try to get some routine care for. Some of it is, even through artificial intelligence that can be helpful and without even having to talk to a real person. But many is you could still access that through telehealth and talk to a real person or see like what we're doing right now via a platform like Zoom. But the other thing is that some people they need real expertise in being able to see somebody for treatment. And you can still do treatment. There's a lot, like we do a ton of treatment still with our psychiatrists and social workers and psychologists through the televideo model. And that's been hugely successful. But then also the ability to get people in person to be seen. And sometimes people need to come into the hospital because they are at such risk of suicide or of having mania or even schizophrenia and psychotic issues that they really need to come into the hospital to get the help they need. So I guess long-winded way to say that people do get better with appropriate treatment. The key is making sure that people actually reach out. And the 3 hardest words that somebody can say is "I need help." And when somebody says, "I need help," especially when it comes to mental health and addiction issues, is we want to be able to do whatever we can to get that person help as soon as possible, because that window of time where that person is recognizing the help they need and is willing to get the help they need, that's a key moment in a time. So whatever we can do to try to get them help at that time is best. A resource that I would highly recommend anybody is looking for is NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness. They've got a great consortium across the country and a wonderful resources available. You could just go onto their website and there's a lot of materials about, what is mental illness, how do you recognize it, and then how do you get help? And that would be a very easy place for somebody to start who really has not had any experience, any history or exposure to mental health care.
That's great. Well, if there's one thing this podcast is designed to do is to let people know that you don't have to do this alone. And this particular topic of mental health is a perfect example. And I think the resources you gave are great. I'm also familiar with the faith-based program, Celebrate Recovery. That's helped made a big difference in our community here. And they have a national registry as well online. So the main thing is that you speak up and get the help you need. And
That's right.
Celebrate
Recovery is a great resource for people who are experiencing addiction of all kinds. And then another national resource is Addiction Policy Forum, which is a platform by which educates family members and those who are suffering from addiction. To kind of the same thing in the national NAMI is it can give you direction, and there'll be people you can talk to, et cetera. I'm on their advisory committee, and I highly endorse that group.
All right, that sounds great. Well, next time we're going to talk a little bit more about how wellness has to play with our workforce. But thanks so much, Jim, for being here for this episode.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Mike.
Now we want to land the conversation, the part of the podcast where we prepare you to put this into practice. Well, we just finished listening to Dr. Jim Barry, and some of these topics, Mike, that we're going through are pretty weighty. And I think you shared with me even a story recently. So tell us that story.
Yeah, it's been great reaching out to some people and having people reach out to me, who are listening and following some of our material. And I had one young lady, she's about 25 years old. She's like, "Hey, Mike, it's really cool, your podcast and, the stuff you're talking about." She's like, "But I got to be honest with you." She's like, "It doesn't fit my normal news feed." She's like, "Normally I just sort of, flip through and catch this and keep going." She's like, "Yours, I have to stop and actually think about what you're saying." She's like, "But when I do, it's so good. It's so good." So it did just hit me that what we're talking about is a new type of leadership, a new kind of leader who is more reflective and who is more intentional. And that really we live in some times that are very complex. And so while we're covering topics that are weighty, they're very relevant, especially coming out of the pandemic, harder, but helpful, hopefully. So just want to kind of acknowledge that thank you for those of you who are kind of hanging with us and being willing to do the hard work here.
Yeah. And we even encourage all of our listeners, take a pause. That is totally okay to take a pause and reflect on some of the discussion points that we've had before. I think it is really good when we're talking about drastic change that we're wanting to see the times change and ourselves change. We're talking about deeper transformation from the inside out. And not just behavioral modification, nuggets here and there that I can put in my pocket, but really just the inside out change. And so, we encourage you, take a pause and kind of marinate in some of these ideas that we have. So moving on, Dr. Jim Barry gave some sobering statistics in this topic of mental health and the realities of what we have faced before and the changes that we are facing now. He mentioned that, we saw a 40% increase in psychological distress by the fall of 2020. And that doesn't even include the aftermath and what we're dealing with right now in the present. So when we talk about being a leader contributes to the challenges of anxiety and pressure as in its natural role. As a leader, how do we take assessment for how we are doing personally? We firefight all the time, right? That's part of the role. We are putting out fires. We're going. We're building. We're ahead of the game. So what are some indicators to watch out for regarding burnout or just mental, physical, emotional distress?
Yeah, great question. And I was thinking about that in my own life. I actually talked to a counselor one time. I said, "Hey, I'm working through some things." I said, "I think I'm good, but how will I know if I'm not? What if it's a blind spot? I can't even tell if I'm not okay, And they said something that was really insightful and helpful for me. They said, "Listen, if you have an emotional reaction to something that is disproportionate to what just happened, that's a clue for you. So if you're very angry or you start to cry or, you have this outburst of emotion, and as you look at the situation, it doesn't really warrant that much effort, then that's an indicator, sort of like a dashboard light on your car, check engine light. You need to check under the hood." And we've all been in meetings also where, someone else will have a reaction and you're just like, "What just happened right there?" Like, what was that? That's an indicator that, hey, there's more going on under the hood. And so I actually really like the engine light analogy and, be kind of taking notice when there is something going on. And I know my dad told me once, hey, this is an acronym of HALT, HALT. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, that's not the time to make a big decision. Hit pause, right? HALT on that, do some reflection, get some food, get some rest, spend some time with some friends, do what you need to do to get yourself in a better place, and then make some major decisions from there.
Oh, so good. So practical. I think when we talk about mental health, a lot of times people associate mental health with just emotions. And so I really love the health analogy because that kind of touches the base across the board. It's not just emotions. We are people made up of the emotions, the physical, the mental. And so all three of those things work together. They're all connected. They feed one another. What would you say to possibly leaders? We're talking about wanting to become a new kind of leader, whether it's people who have not been leaders before, shifting into that role, or leaders who realize, man, I am lacking in some of these areas. And so when we talk about mental health, what do you say to some of those leaders who maybe have never kind of faced their emotions or their mental health head on, who would just look at the whole, let's look under the hood thing with, maybe disdain, fear, they're afraid of what they're going to find. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, you don't have to pay attention to it. You can take a 3x5 card and just put it over your check engine light and pretend like it doesn't exist and just keep driving. But if the fuel gauge is on E and you ignore it, you can try to keep driving. Or if your temperature gauge is hot, you can kind of try to keep going. But what's actually going to happen is eventually you're going to run out of gas, or eventually it's going to overheat and explode. And then you've wrecked the car. And at that point, the consequences are usually more severe, sometimes fatal, and it's harder to recover from. So I like to say, take the warning sign, hit the pause button, check under the hood when you still are in charge, when you still have choices, because if you don't pay attention to it, eventually the consequences will force you to pay attention to it. And those are usually harder to get out of.
Oh, that's really insightful. I've talked to leaders before where they have shared with me that they actually don't even know how to describe their emotions because it's so foreign to them. And so I would say even to that sometimes rather than trying to possibly label an emotion, which seems very foreign, to even check some of those things. Am I more tired than usual? Am I sleeping more? Am I not enjoying the things that I used to enjoy? And so some of those abnormalities, that versus what they would used to enjoy versus now, even looking for that kind of thing. And then you share with me, there was like a list of emotions that you had on a piece of paper. I love that because sometimes looking at a list of emotions and going through each of those and saying, oh, that's the one. That's how I feel. That's what anxiety feels like, or that's what fear feels like. And so that I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I think noticing the external change of behavior or the change of thought pattern or sleep or eating or weight loss, or there's going to be something that you're going to see before you even realize that something's wrong. Take notice of that and do the hard work of, hey, what's really going on there? Why am I so angry? Who am I so angry at? What bothered me about that so much? Dig a little deeper. And this is where really often you have to ask for help because we all do have blind spots. And this is where the help of a professional, a counselor, a therapist, a minister, a pastor, a friend, someone who can just help, shed some light on what's going on there, unpack that for you a little bit. And having the courage to be able to ask for help becomes real important at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. As leaders, we have our role is to take care of our team and to always look out for those that are around us. And you posed this question before, but who takes care of leaders, right? And when you've talked about the heroic leader before, the model of leadership where the leader is at the very top, this is kind of coming against that and breaking that down. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you just said that. So what we're talking about right now is often after the fact or when you're feeling burnout or not in a good place, what do you do? And having the courage to come forward with that and say, hey, I need some help, right? That's super important for us right now as leaders to be able to own that, admit that, and take the necessary steps. One of the best ways to prevent even getting into that spot or to prolong the time of when you're not going into those kind of darker places is to have a more shared leadership approach. Because if you have a leadership approach that is top down, a main person at the top, often those leaders feel alone and they don't feel like they have a safe place, a person they can talk to, and they feel like they're going to get fired by their board or let their team down because everything kind of rests on me. And so that kind of pressure that she or he feels in that spot really adds to the problem. It actually adds layers of anxiety on top of whatever the particular situation is. So to prevent that from even getting to that far, to say, hey, let's lead in community. Let's do a shared team approach. Yeah. You have a leadership spot. You have a leadership spot. Together, we're doing that. Automatically, that weight gets diffused. And I'm talking from experience and from evidence-based research here, that there's just a weight that gets lifted. There's still hard stuff to do. It's still not easy. The role of a leader, there's uncertainty and all of the challenges we have as leaders, but you're not alone. Yeah. And that in itself makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Dr. Mike, you are not just someone who presents information, you also do the work. And so recently, you went through a recovery group, a support group. And so as a leader, why did you do that and how did it help you?
Yeah. So coming into this year, 2022, I wanted to just do a check on myself. We had been through some transition in our church as far as leadership, new roles and responsibilities there, coming out of the pandemic, leading out of that. So I just said, you know what, this is kind of a new season for me. And before I jump in with 2 feet, I want to make sure that I'm doing the hard work in my own head and my own heart of being healthy myself. Seeing a lot of leaders who are struggling, and, I don't even know what I don't know just yet, so I want to go through a process. And so I joined, it's called a STEP study through a group called Celebrate Recovery. It's a faith-based 12-step program, and it walks you through just like if it was an Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, but this is faith-based and it has 8 principles that they walk you through, but it's step by step by step. And you do an internal inventory of hurts, habits, hangups in your life in the past and present. You got to say, you're sorry, make amends for times you hurt people and realize that, hey, hurt people. And I've also been on the end of, hurting people and been hurt myself. So just working through those, sitting in some of those emotions a little bit that was, uncomfortable and things I would rather just skate over, say, oh, that was no big deal. But then I realized, it still is in there. Like I still think about that sometimes. It still bothers me sometimes. And so really doing the hard work of getting free from that stuff and letting that go. And to do that with a group of, in this case, it was other guys who were going through a similar thing. And, for me, I don't have an addiction to drugs and alcohol or pornography or those kind of things that sometimes you might think of in a typical sort of support group or recovery program. Mine was more about achievement, about pace, about how that my leadership reflects on me as a person, my own identity, and being able to say, hey, whether the things I lead are going up or down does not necessarily mean me as a person has more value or less value, right? That I'm who I am and I have value regardless of the circumstances or the organizations or groups of people that I'm helping to lead, So those were just some really great health checks and some important relationships in my life that got kind of shored up through that time. So I actually just finished it a couple weeks ago. I feel really at peace and calm and content having gone through that process. So I would definitely recommend that or a similar kind of experience for anyone who's just trying to do a health check right now, take some time and go through a process like that.
I think it's really common for leaders to have that mindset that my achievement is very closely tied to my worth or value. And so maybe right now, could you give us something practical to walk? Let's say a leader, is feeling kind of down through the pandemic. I mean, we talked about a halt in achievement, a halt in growth, a lot of just things that they had to overcome. And so if you're to our listeners right now who are feeling a little bit of that, man, I haven't been able to accomplish anything, or I haven't seen any growth, and man, I am just feeling it. I don't feel very valuable. How can they turn that around? What has worked for you?
Something that's worked for me, it's a great question. Something that's worked for me and some other leaders that I've been coaching is this topic of a scoreboard or a scorecard. So most of us that are high achievers are also competitors. We want to win. We want to be successful. Nobody wants to fail or lose, Someone said the other day, you need to learn how to lose, but you don't want to get used to it. So that's how we're wired, like who wants to keep showing up and lose every day? And I think that's what's happening. A lot of people are going to work and they're not seeing results like they used to. They remember a time when they used to be, or it's brand new and they don't even know what they're getting into, So I think something very helpful can be to say, what's your scoreboard? Like, how do you define a win? Or what's your scorecard? Like, how are you going to measure whether you're successful or not? And probably if you've been leading for a while, you have an old scoreboard, things that you used to measure about volume and pace and expansion and growth and stuff that has to do with a lot of numbers. And those things are not working right now, right? So having a new scoreboard that you start to measure about things like value and quality and personal interaction and connection with people, like changing the way you measure whether you're being successful right now or not, I think it has been super helpful for me and seems to have been freeing for some other people that I've talked to as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. Where would you suggest people to get help? You did mention kind of that Celebrate Recovery 12-step program. What would be some other resources or places that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'm just my own experience with Celebrate Recovery has been extremely positive. So I certainly would recommend that to others. They have a website you can go on and put in your location, your zip code, and you can find a recovery group near you. So if you're out there in the United States, there's one near you. I promise you can start there. I've actually been pretty intrigued with this BetterHelp. It's kind of an online subscription-based mental health counseling platform. I hear a lot about it. I have some friends who are using it, have having good results there. So if you're not sure of a person in your local community or you don't quite feel safe, right there, you might want to check out BetterHelp. That's kind of an online system for getting some mental health. But eventually, I definitely encourage people to just start by opening up to someone. Find a trusted person, a safe person, a friend, a spouse, a minister, a congregation member, somebody, a neighbor, somebody that you feel like, hey, I can just share a bit of where I am and start somewhere. I think that's really important. Just take that step, even just one person, there's nothing in your life should be there that nobody knows about. Like if you're carrying something right now and literally nobody else knows about it, that's not a good place to be. You need to come clean with that and find a safe person who cares about you and has your best interest in mind and start to take some baby steps toward that.
So good. Well, thank you, Mike. I know that this episode was mainly focused on leaders and mental health of leaders. Our next episode with Dr. Jim Barry is about health in the workplace. And so if listeners right now, you're going to want to be sure to make sure you follow, hit subscribe, and tune in to that episode. It's going to be so good. Thanks for listening to the High Purpose Leadership Podcast. To work with Dr. Mike McCormick, head over to highpurposepractice.com.